The last time you started your car, did you think of what made that possible? The last time your house heated up over a cold winter's night, did you think of what made that possible? Now, starting a car and running the heat are just two things that an everyday American takes for granted. However, heat and fuel come from the same non-renewable resource, fossil fuels. Now, fossil fuels, like it or not, will not be around long enough to keep up with today's growing demand for energy. And in fact, we've heard this. There have been commercials telling us to save fuel, carpool even. Politicians have advocated for carpool lanes within states, and it's worked. In California specifically, there's a specific carpool lane for those who choose to help save the environment. Although these politicians and these commercials haven't offered a solution to stop the energy crisis. So we look to an idea of a renewable energy source, such as corn and grasses. Now, corn and grasses are made to a fuel known as ethanol. And ethanol is made in three basic steps. First, there is harvesting that corn or grass. Second, there's grinding it down so that we may refine it. And finally, the refinal process where we are then able to use it. Today, a majority of our alternative energy comes from the use of corn ethanol. But the question arises, corn ethanol, will it be the solution to the energy crisis? To first understand this possible solution, we will start by harvesting our initial idea of using petroleum as the main energy source. Then we're going to grind out our initial idea of using corn as the main producer for ethanol. And finally, refining it down to what could be the new technology of the ethanol industry. Now, petroleum is made from fossil fuels that were formed millions of years ago. As we use petroleum more and more to keep our houses warm or drive ourselves to the mall, we reduce the amount of fossil fuels left for future generations. In fact, the U.S. Department of Energy predicts that if we continue to use fossil fuels at the rate at which we use them, there will only be enough for the next 100 to 150 years. Now, it is our moral obligation as the leaders and shapers of America to pave pathways for the youth to take over. However, when we look at the production of petroleum, we find that it takes 18 gallons of water to produce just 1 gallon of petroleum. And none of that water is reusable or safe. Now, this is a fact we don't know or we don't think of when it comes to the production of petroleum. Yet, petroleum has held up its end of the bargain. The technology that once was an advancement for its time is now the very reason that Americans are becoming mad with the industry. Lester Brown, in an article entitled "Why Ethanol Will Drive World Food Prices Up in 2008, stated that the irony is, U.S. taxpayers, by subsidizing a conversion of food into fuel, are in fact financing a raise in their own food needs. It is time to end this subsidy, and to do it quickly before the deteriorating world food situation spirals out of control. Here's where we start to grind our initial idea of using corn as the main producer for ethanol. We have become so fixated as Americans to solve the problem that we have not looked fully at what has happened. Now, Lester Brown, in another article entitled "Why Ethanol Could Leave the World Hungry," published just 2 short years before his article in 2008, stated that reports by the U.S. Department of Energy predict world grain consumption will go up by 20 million tons this year. Roughly 70% of that, or 14 million tons, will be used to fuel cars here in the U.S., leaving only 6 million tons to keep up with the world's growing food needs. If we continue to convert food into fuel, how are we supposed to keep up with the world's growing food population? Now, the answer to this very question is refining What could be the new technology for the ethanol industry? Miscanthus grass and other grasses like it are known as a biomass. Now, grasses provide many of the solutions that corn doesn't. For example, it can be grown in multiple different climates. It can also be grown on multiple different terrains. And it can be harvested multiple times throughout a growing season. Now, when I say the word biomass, that's basically just a fancy way of saying plant material that can be harvested and converted into fuel. Now, a Science Daily article found that produce the same amount of ethanol from miscanthus would require only 9.3% of current agricultural acreage. Now, this finding is backed up by a study done at the University of Illinois, where they found that the same amount of ethanol produced through miscanthus could produce 2.5 times the amount of ethanol per acre of corn. It is time to stop converting U.S. cropland from feeding the world to fueling our country. We need to think about what has happened and understand that grasses are what make this new technology what it is. Now, the big ethanol push came from the prospects of the White House. Their goal was to produce enough ethanol to offset 20% of gasoline use. What they failed to realize is by doing this, it would take 25% of current agricultural acreage out of U.S. crop production. It is time to end the conversion of food into fuel. And it is time that we look to a new idea, a new technology for the ethanol industry. So to move forward, we need to look at miscanthus and other biomasses. This is where the industry needs to go. But when we look at it realistically, we must understand that currently we are only feeding 7 billion people. But by 2050, it is predicted that we will have to feed over 9 billion people. And we're going to have to do that on less land and resources than we have ever had to do before. Therefore, when we look at corn as the main producer for ethanol, we need to understand that corn needs to be used to feed the country. So grasses need to be that new producer. So I guess the ultimate question is, corn ethanol, is it a solution or is it a hoax? I'll let you decide. Thank you.